back with our exclusive interview with agent Kelli Masters. Jen, I know that you have, of course, your
the intro.
epic intro.
Matt, I thought you meant kicking off the episode. Sorry, my bad. Let me kick off Kelli. So, Mitch, I have the best of the best. You know, I only roll with the baddest of the baddies, the women who change the game the right way all the time. But wait, I don't know if you know just how good this woman is. Not only was she the first female agent to represent a top 5 pick, but she has also repped more athletes than any other woman in history. And oh wait, by the way, last year, all of her players were starters. That's right. The one, the only, the one you want with your player who always has it back, Kelli Masters.
Hi, how are you, Jen? You are the woman. I am so excited to be with you talking today, talking football. I love it.
I mean, talking football and players. And Mitch, if you don't know this, one of the funniest things is before Kelli and I even met each other, we were like paired by people. They're like, oh, you guys are so much the same. Like Coach Jen always talks about how she loves her players. The agent that always talks about the relationships and athlete player relationship. Kelli Masters, you guys have to know each other. Are you like totally friends? And we were like, we will be.
Will be. I remember, Jen, before meeting you, and people would say that to me, like, you've got to meet this woman. She's remarkable. And I read, I think, an interview or something about you, and one of your players that you coached in the NFL was talking about maybe a note that you'd written him, like you left him a note or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I have found like my twin in coaching. Like this is exactly what I would do. Yeah. And so from day one, I had such respect because I'm like, yes, this is a woman who gets it. This is a woman who sees players, not just their potential on the field, but them as human beings. And in order to coach them effectively, in order to represent them effectively, you have to see them for who they really are. And you and I connect on that. And we've always connected on that. And I love it. I love what you've done. I love what you're doing. And I just want to be part of your life. I just love what you do. This is so great.
And the feeling is so mutual. And Kelli, I think with that, I don't know if a lot of people would understand how you got into being an agent, because obviously, I mean, you were the trailblazer in terms of female agents, right? The ones that we see now are really standing on your strong shoulders, and you personally mentored so many of them. Yes. But it was kind of a unique path for you. Can you just give us a little background?
Yes. So I grew up in Oklahoma, which, of course, my neighbors to the south in Texas will argue with me, but I think Oklahoma high school football is just it. So I was raised on Oklahoma football, high school football, Oklahoma Sooners, OSU Cowboys. Every single Friday night was a football game. Every single Saturday was a college game. And then on Sundays, we watched the Cowboys or the Steelers. And so my whole life revolved around, honestly, just being being a fan. I remember asking my dad, though. My dad was an attorney, but he was also a radio play-by-play guy. And so I would go with him as a little bitty girl to games when he would call games. And I would have all these questions like, Daddy, tell me about this. Tell me, why do they do that? Why do they do this? And finally, I remember being like, 4.5, 5 years old, and my dad sitting down and going, okay, I'm tired of all of your questions. I'm just going to give you a talk. I'm going to explain the X's and O's. You're going to get it. And then no more questions. Got it? And I was like, 5-year-old me. Okay.
No, so, that means we're just starting questions.
Yeah,
but anyway,
exactly. I'm going to have so many questions after this. So anyway, got my first talk when I was a little bitty, fell in love with a game, became such a fan, and didn't get to play. And that's the funny thing is I remember as a little girl going, I want to be out there. Like I would go to the games and go, I want to be out there on the field. And, my parents would be like, oh, well, girls don't play football. I wish I'd known you back then. I don't know what position I would have played, but maybe corner. I don't know. But I loved the game. I wanted to be part of it. And so my route to being part of the game initially was as a baton twirler. I was like, well, I don't want to be a cheerleader on the sidelines. I want to be out on the field, and the twirler gets to be on the field. So I'm going to do that. So I did that through college, went to law school. Honestly, thought I never had an idea that I could work in football. That just, I always thought, I love it, but it's not, I don't see any avenues for me. And so I'm just going to love the game, but I'm going to pursue my passion. And my passion was serving. My passion was helping people. My passion was, I was raised by a lawyer. I learned so much from my father. I admired how he would take everybody's problems on himself, on his own shoulders, and give them solutions. He was always in their corner. And I'm like, that's the kind of person I want to be. I want to be someone who is advocating and protecting and fighting for people I care about. And so I didn't know it, but everything was aligning. I went to law school. I started my law practice. My initial, heart for serving people started with working in the nonprofit arena. So as a trial lawyer, I got to be competitive as a trial lawyer, but I also got to work with nonprofit organizations of people giving back. And then it's funny how fate just steps in. I got a call 5 years into my law practice from an NFL player and his family. They had started a foundation. They had run into all kinds of issues and they needed a lawyer. So they hired me, and that turned my world upside down. I started learning about what players go through when they go through that transition from student athlete to professional and all the things that are involved in that. And I remember his mom grabbing my hand in a board meeting and saying, "Where were you in the beginning? Why didn't we have someone like you in our corner? You should be an agent." And that's where it started. So yeah, I took a really indirect route. I became a certified NFL contract advisor at age 32. I had no connections. I knew nothing about the industry. I studied and passed the exam on the collective bargaining agreement and salary cap. And so I knew the business, like legal nuts and bolts of everything. But other than that, I was completely green. And you know what? I jumped in. I said, you know what? I'm passionate about helping these players become the best that they can be on and off the field, with their legacies, with their brand, with their everything that they want to accomplish in their life. So I'm just going to jump in and figure it out. And here I am 16 years later, still doing it.
I know. And I love that. And speaking of where were you from the beginning? And you have a player right now who is in the beginning. And I personally cannot think of a better person to look out for Tylan Wallace, wide receiver out of Oklahoma State. So yep. I don't know if a lot of people understand what that beginning looks like, what this process is. Like, can you take us through coming out of school? You're now going to do combine, or this year, which was weird, which more pro days, and then going into the draft process, and what that's like for him, and also for you as an agent. And what advice would you give other people who don't really understand that part?
So a lot of people have this image of what an agent is like, and they picture Jerry Maguire, they picture show me the money and all the stereotypical images, which of course not that I say that, but of course part of my job will be to make sure he is paid commensurate with his abilities, with his market value, with his value to the team, all of that. So that's part of it, obviously, but that's not where we start. So when we start, this is a kid. Remember, they're 21 years old, 22 years old. They are kids that we are putting up on this pedestal and have all these expectations on. And so I get to know these kids through their college career, their families. I become very close with Tylan and his mom and his twin brother, which I totally identify with because I'm a twin. And so I kind of recruited both of them through the process, Tylan and Trayson, his twin brother. Trayson is going to become a coach, by the way, which I need to get you in touch with him because he could use your mentorship. But Tylan, so I follow him all the way through his career. I learn everything about him, what makes him tick, his makeup, just on and off the field, who he is, the strengths that he brings to the table, the things that he needs to work on to make that transition to the next level. And so learn everything about him, sit down, convince him that I'm the right steward for his career. And then he and his family made that decision. As an agent, I spend a ton of time recruiting, a ton of time just like falling in love with these players and getting to know everything about them. And at the end of the day, sometimes I just get a text that says, thanks, go in a different direction. But then on the wonderful days, I get the phone call like I did from Thailand, who said, I want you to be my agent. I trust you with my career. And so I went to the bowl game with Thailand after he finished his final collegiate game. We sat down, we, did all the necessary paperwork, and then we mapped out what his next few weeks were going to look like. I checked him into a training facility. He wanted to train close to home. So I found a great place, great trainer, great position coaches, great media coaches, interview coaches, all of the above. So this army of people to help him get ready for, we didn't know if there was going to be a combine, but get ready for whatever the evaluation process was going to look like. I had to remind him, however, and a lot of people don't think about this, that scouts and teams typically make their decisions based on a body of work, based on their film study, and based on scouts who have gone to watch the players. When we have pro days and combine, that is a check the box. Like, is he as fast as we thought he was? Is he as strong as we thought he was? Does he medically check out? How does he do in the interview room? So it's a lot of checking off those boxes. The biggest thing with the combine and pro day process is medicals and team interviews, because they've already seen the film. And I can't, as an agent, no matter what I say, can't change what's on film. I just can't. As much as I want to make teams think certain things about players, the film is what it is. And so I just walk him through the process. I communicate with teams. I make sure they have the access to him that they need, that they have the information, that they're looking at the right information on him, that they have all the questions answered. Something that I did this year, because I had an inkling we wouldn't have a combine, is the day I signed him, the very next day, we got on a plane to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to go to Sanford Health to get a complete physical, head to toe, concussion, sweat test, echo, EKG, stress test. He saw an ortho, he did MRIs, he did x-rays. We put together an entire independent medical file to attach to his college file, so that every single team, all 32 teams, had all of his medicals from an independent review, and an independent physical from an elite standpoint, and sent those out to teams. Teams were so excited when I did that, because they're like, we're hearing that there's no combine. And then he wasn't going to do Senior Bowl. That's another aspect of it, is doing the All-Star games. He was one of those guys that in a typical year probably wouldn't have gone to a Senior Bowl or a Shrine game or an NFLPA game, because he has such good film. And a lot of teams were saying, don't go. But because there was no combine, the Senior Bowl was his one opportunity to get on the field, to prove himself in front of eyeballs, and also to get in rooms. And Jen, you and I can appreciate this. I mean, here we're sitting here on Zoom. This has been everyone's world for the last year, is connecting through Zoom. There's something about sitting in a room and connecting with someone and seeing their body language and feeling their vibe. And only the players that went to Senior Bowl this year got that chance to sit in a room. It was behind plexiglass, but you got to sit in a room with teams. So yeah, so that's my first, few weeks with a new player, is like I have this new baby and I'm doing everything for him. Not that he's not capable, but it's just a ton to do and a ton to process. And I am his eyes and ears when it comes to dealing with the union and with the teams through the entire process, make sure he's prepared. And then once we get through that whole evaluation process, then it's the draft. And then it's, okay, is he really ready to transition to the NFL? And so I have all of my veteran players pour into my young guys, pour wisdom, give them recommendations, we get them set up. And then after that, it's a lot of non-football stuff, a lot of legal work, a lot of business stuff, setting up entities, helping him find a house where he's drafted, helping him ship his car and his dog to the new location. Like, all of that stuff falls on my plate. So yeah, an agent does a lot more than just shout, show me the money.
How does that recruitment process actually start, and when does it start? I know you kind of alluded to it, but you said so much information that I was just overwhelmed. So maybe go back to the beginning.
It is a lot.
Go back to the beginning and maybe let the people know, like, how does that start, and how do you track these players down and determine who your player is going to be?
Great question. So in my very early years as a baby agent, I realized that I didn't just need to do my own evaluation. I needed to know the evaluators. I needed to know the decision makers. And so I purposely got in my car and drove from place to place to place, sitting down and talking to scouting departments, talking to scouts, meeting area scouts, meeting regional and national scouts, talking to general managers, understanding how they evaluated players. And I started developing relationships. And I remember early on, some of my male counterparts were like, Kelli, why are you wasting your time getting to know all these scouts? And I was like, well, first of all, it's not a waste of time because these guys are boots on the ground. They are the ones that are writing the reports that turn into draft grades, that turn into names on a big board, every team. So you got to know the scouts, and you got to know what they're looking at and how they're scouting, because there's so many different approaches. And so I developed a really vast network of scouts across the NFL. And number two, I also said the really good scouts are going to become general managers someday. And now 23 of the current general managers in the NFL were dudes that I met when they were area scouts, driving from school to school, evaluating players. And I still have those relationships. Guess what? It wasn't a waste of time. And so relationships, learning, sitting and watching film with them, understanding what they're watching, what they're looking for, and what else they want to know. I remember one of the oldest scouts, CEO Mercado. Jen, I don't know if you ever met him. The Tennessee Titans War Room is named after him. He's passed away since then. He was probably 80 when I met him. He actually invented the cone drill, the L drill. He's been around. He had been around forever when I met him, and that was 16 years ago. And I remember, having dinner with him one time. We met for dinner when he was in Oklahoma scouting some players. And I think we had dinner at like 4:30 in the afternoon. And he was like, Kelli, you're going to be the best agent because you're listening and you're learning and you're taking the time. And he said, when I watch a player, there are a lot of talented players in the NFL, but you know what it comes down to? Heart. It comes down to heart. And he's like, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking not just at the stats, I'm looking at the hearts. Yep. And that shaped me. And so I remember that to this day. So I start gathering information on players. Because I have all of these, to me, they're all like brothers or uncles. They just will call and say, hey, Kelli, you need to check out this player. Like, I think from an on the field and off the field standpoint, he's a perfect fit for what you do. And so I get a lot of recommendations, and I compile scouting reports from around the country on players as early as their freshman year. And then I start making those cold calls, finding ways to get in front of them, finding ways to connect with families. Social media has become a bigger part of recruiting, but I'm still old school. I still pick up the phone. I still want to sit in living rooms and develop real relationships. And that's where the whole recruiting process starts. It starts early on, and I'll recruit 30 or 40 players for one draft and end up signing 1 to 4 typically.
One of the things you said is so interesting is that, you wanted to know all elements of the business and how they interconnected. I remember I did the same thing when I took a scouting and general management course. And I was working with players on the psychology side, but it was like, how am I going to help you be equipped to manage this process if I don't understand it? Right. And so much of the friction comes in where it's a lack of understanding in how all of those things fit together. And a lot of guys, they go through it. So they assume that they know all of it, whether they do or not, having experienced it. But from a female coming in, it's a very different, it's a different element. And, the care that you put into it is also unique. One of the things we always hear from players is the game doesn't love you. And my pushback is the game doesn't, but the people can. And I know that's something that you've really been known for throughout your career. Can you tell me a particular story of a player who that really might have made a difference for?
There are so many, so many stories. One story that I don't know if this answers your question, but it pops into my mind because it's one of my all-time favorite player stories. I was at the combine with Gerald McCoy, and Gerald was the number 3 overall pick to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2010. He was a, classic 3 technique tackle, amazing young man who had lost his mother very suddenly when he was a freshman in college. And he and his mom were very, very close, and she was the strong matriarch of the family. And she died of an aneurysm. It was very sudden. He didn't get to say goodbye, and it always stayed with him. And I had met her actually because I met Gerald when he was in high school. So fast forward, I'm representing him in the draft. We go to the combine, and I'm walking around Indianapolis and going from meeting to meeting, and I get this phone call from Gerald, but I could barely understand him. He was bawling, just could not get his breath. He was bawling. I was like, "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Are you injured? What's going on?" And he's like, "They're trying to get me to do an MRI." And I was like, "Well, then do an MRI." Like, no one's ever died in an MRI machine, to my knowledge. You're going to be fine. Just do the MRI. And he's like, "No, Kels, you don't understand. Like, I'm really claustrophobic, and they don't seem to get that here, and no one will help me." And without even a second thought, I was like, "Do you want me to come to you?" And he's like, "Can you?" I was like, "I will find a way." And so I went to where they had taken him to the MRI machines at the combine at Lucas Oil were too small for him. And so, because he was a massive guy. And so they took him to a local hospital. So this was years ago. So I took a cab to the hospital. I met him. He's pacing around the room. He's in tears. I'm like, "We've got to get this done. Like, if you refuse this MRI, it could hurt your draft stock. Like, they will send you home for the combine. You cannot, they will think you're hiding something. You got to do it. And I will talk you through it." And so we tried everything. We wheeled him in like 7 times. And every single time he would freak out and burst into tears and start yelling. And so finally, I was like, I asked the doctor, I was like, "Can we give him a sedative? Is there like, can we play music? What can we do?" And he's like, "We can't give him anything. You're just going to have to sing to him." And I'm like, "Okay." So we couldn't get it done. He had dinner that night with the Lions. And so I was like, "Look, we got to get him back to dinner." And I put him in a cab, and on the way to dinner, he falls asleep, and I wake him up. I'm like, "Okay, you go to dinner with the Lions. I will take care of this. I'll figure something out." So he went to dinner. I started calling. I found a hospital with an open MRI. So the sides were open. They'd been trying to put him in the normal MRI, wasn't working. So long story short, I sat in an open MRI machine room with my player because he refused to let me leave the room. And I sat with him for 4 hours while he got his MRI, and until like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I told jokes, I sang to him, I visualized with him, like, this is what it's going to be like when you're drafted. And then when you run out of the tunnel the first time in an NFL uniform. And I was just trying to get his mind off of what he was going through. And tears were still streaming down his face. Anyway, bottom line, he gets out, and I hear him on the phone with his dad. And he's like, "Dad, it was like Mom was in the room with me." And the tech was like, "I have never seen an agent do that. I've never seen an agent that cared enough to go spend time to make sure her player was going to be okay." And that moment solidified our relationship. He always knew I had his back.
It's so funny, Kelli. I had a player after one of our games, and they'll take them for, to get examined, right?
Yeah.
Right after the game, they get hurt, and they just send him off. And I was like, "Wait a minute, hold on. Who's with him right now?"
He's by himself, hurt.
Right. And they're like, "Oh, the med staff." And I was like, no. Mm-mm. And I was like right in there with them, holding his hand. You might not be able to do anything, but you certainly can, take away some of that, that pain.
They're human beings. They
Yeah.
are, they may be big and talented and ridiculously strong, but they are human beings. And that's when people say, "Oh, women aren't wired to be agents. Women are too soft or too emotional or whatever." I'm like, "No, women are the badasses that can do it all. Like, we can be there and be caring and make them feel like we know who they are as people and value them as people. And we can also fight our asses off for them to make sure that they have the best possible opportunities." So women are fully capable. I think now, I was trying to tell everybody that in the beginning before I had any actual track record. And now I can look back at all my guys that I have watched grow up and are now going on to having, second careers and families and are being productive citizens. And I know that it was important that I was in their life.
For sure. So let's go back to the current draft.
Okay.
And the player that you have now going in.
Yep.
I know you probably can't give us the inside scoop on who's looking at him, because we know you know and you're fielding the call. But what we can ask is there a particular team that you could see him being a great fit with, because you also know the organizational culture and what the offensive schemes in? Is there somewhere where you see him particularly excelling? Because, you know, I know as a coach and you know as an agent, the organizational fit is a huge part of the success trajectory of players. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Without giving away too much information or even all the reasons why I see the Raiders being a fit for him, I also see the Packers being a good spot for him. Those organizations, I've worked with the leadership of both organizations. I'm very familiar. The Titans really, really like him, but I don't know. I don't know if that's, and I don't want the Titans to take that as a bad thing. I see his fit situationally and system wise being the best with the Raiders and the Packers. So that's just my gut feeling.
Well, we all know that the Packers need to pick some wide receivers early. It's been the narrative for them for a while. So Packers, if you're listening, Aaron Rodgers needs some receivers.
Give him Alan Wallace. Get him early.
Right, get him early.
Yeah. Love it.
Kelli, we have one final question for you. Okay. And I just want to ask, as a fan, we don't know what goes into the agent-player relationship, specifically when it comes to the draft. So is there one thing that you can give us that maybe nobody really knows when they're watching this draft, this event? One little piece of information.
You know, I think the biggest thing is, as an agent, I am in charge of managing expectations. And I learned that early, that a player, it is no matter how much you mentally and emotionally prepare them for the draft process, it is brutal. Just ask Aaron Rodgers, ask Tom Brady. You know, they're still scarred to this day because of their draft experience. And so managing those expectations and letting a player know you're not in this alone. I know you feel like you're alone, but you're not. And this is all going to work out. And we are going to believe that the best team and the best situation is going to come to you. And so I think that's making sure that a player is truly emotionally prepared for that process, and then managing expectations. That's on draft day. That's my main goal.
Awesome. I learned so much, Jen.
I told you, she's the best. There's a reason why she has been the woman who's been leading this charge for so long, and not only mentoring players, but other agents, and is really a go-to for what it can look like to have that agent athlete bond and to really be holistic in that approach. And I know that I can just imagine what the emotions are going to be in that upcoming draft. Definitely, Talon is in the best hands possible, and let him know that we will be watching and hoping that he goes early.
Yeah, thank you so much.